When I first came to Oregon as a young bride, I carried with me nothing more than hope, a suitcase of clothes, and the belief that love would conquer all things. I had married a man I truly adored, a man whose smile seemed to brighten even the gloomiest winter days of this rainy state. We began our life together with excitement, ready to make a home in a place that was beautiful with its tall trees, misty mornings, and mountains rising in the distance. To me, Oregon felt like a dream, a quiet place where we could build our life together. But dreams are not always the same as reality. From the very beginning, I could sense a wall that stood between me and my husband's family. It was not a wall built of stone or wood, but of glances, whispered words, and small silences that spoke louder than anything else. They looked at me as though I were a stranger intruding upon something sacred, something that belonged only to them. I told myself in the beginning that it was only my imagination, that in time they would come to know me, to love me, to welcome me as one of their own. After all, I loved their son, their brother, their nephew. Surely that should have been enough. But as the days turned into weeks and the weeks into months, I began to realize that love alone could not soften their hearts. My first memory of feeling truly unwelcome was during our very first family gathering after the wedding. His family had gathered in the old farmhouse that had been in their family for generations. The table was long, filled with food that smelled delicious, and laughter filled the air as stories of the past were shared. I sat quietly at first, smiling, waiting for a chance to join in. I thought perhaps someone would ask me a question, invite me into the conversation. But no one did. Each time I tried to speak, my words seemed to float into the air unnoticed, as though I were invisible. I felt the warmth of the food, but none of the warmth of belonging. Later that night as we drove home, I asked my husband if I had done something wrong, if perhaps I had offended someone without realizing it. He squeezed my hand gently and told me not to worry, that it was just how his family was, that in time they would come around. His words comforted me then, but a quiet ache remained inside. I wanted so badly to believe him, to believe that time would open their hearts, but the ache only grew stronger as more gatherings came and went. With every passing season, I began to notice small remarks that cut deeper than they appeared. "That's not how we usually do things," his mother would say whenever I brought a dish or suggested a different way of celebrating a holiday. "You wouldn't understand, you weren't raised like us," his sister once said with a smile that carried more sting than kindness. Even the children picked up on the distance, sometimes whispering, "She's not one of us," as though I were some outsider who would never belong no matter how hard I tried. I told myself again and again to be patient, to show kindness, to prove myself worthy of being part of their family. I helped in the kitchen, I listened to their stories, I learned the way they liked things done, and still the distance remained. It was as though no matter how far I stretched, I could never quite reach them. And yet, in my heart I carried hope. I told myself that families are complicated, that bonds take time to grow, that if I gave enough love eventually love would return to me. But Oregon winters are long, and so too were the winters of my heart in those early years. I remember one Christmas in particular when the ache became almost unbearable. We had decorated our small home with lights and tinsel, and I had spent days baking cookies and preparing little gifts for everyone. I wanted so much to show them how much I cared, to bring a little piece of warmth into their lives. But when we arrived at the family gathering, my gifts were set aside, barely acknowledged. My cookies remained untouched on the counter while everyone reached for the pies his mother had made. The children tore through presents but left mine unopened until the very end, and even then they offered only polite thank yous without the joy I had hoped to see. That night as we drove home, I stared out the car window at the dark roads lined with trees. My husband held my hand, but I said nothing. Tears welled in my eyes, though I tried hard to hide them. In that silence I felt more alone than I had ever felt in my life. I had left my own family behind to start this new life, and now it seemed I belonged nowhere. That was when the words first formed in my mind, though they had already been spoken by others. I was not one of them. I was not part of their circle, not part of their roots that stretched back through generations in this Oregon soil. I was simply the woman who had married into their world, and that, to them, was not enough. Yet still, I hoped. Still, I loved. Still, I believed that somehow, someday, things might change. And so my story continued, filled with days of both love and loneliness, of small joys and quiet sorrows, of trying again and again to be part of something that always seemed just out of reach. As the years moved forward, I tried to tell myself that time would heal the distance between me and my husband's family, yet every gathering only reminded me how wide that distance remained. In those early days, I carried so much eagerness in my heart, a desire to belong, to be accepted not just as my husband's wife, but as a member of their family. I thought if I kept showing kindness, if I kept giving pieces of myself, eventually they would see me for who I was rather than who I was not. But with every passing holiday and every dinner, I realized that kindness alone was not enough to soften hearts that had already decided I was different. Their words were not always cruel, but it was in the way they spoke of traditions that had lasted for generations, as if reminding me that I was too new, too much of an outsider to ever understand. It was in the way they told stories of the past that seemed to close me out, as though history itself was proof that I would never be part of their future. Even the land itself seemed to remind me of my place. Their family had deep roots in Oregon, owning farmland that stretched across valleys and hills. They would speak with pride about how their ancestors had built everything with their bare hands, how the soil held the sweat and stories of those who came before. When I stood among them, listening, I often felt invisible, as though my own roots had no value because they were planted in another place far from their Oregon ground. The unspoken truth was clear: I was not born into their family, therefore I would never truly be one of them. I remember one summer when we helped his family harvest berries from their land. The day was hot, the kind of Oregon heat that feels heavy but still carries the scent of pine in the air. We worked from morning until evening, my hands stained red with berry juice, my back aching from bending over the fields. I thought surely, after a long day of working beside them, they would see my effort and feel a connection to me. But when the work was done and they gathered on the porch to laugh and rest, I sat quietly to the side. No one thanked me for helping, no one asked me to join the circle of chairs where they told jokes and shared lemonade. I felt like a shadow sitting there, close enough to hear but never truly included. That night as we drove home, I told my husband how lonely I felt. He tried to reassure me, telling me again that it was not personal, that his family just held on to old ways, that they would never mean to hurt me. His words were gentle, but they did not match the coldness I felt each time his mother's eyes slid past me as though I were unworthy of notice. In the privacy of our home, I would sometimes cry quietly, not wanting to burden him with my sadness. I had left everything familiar behind to be with him, and though I never regretted that choice, the emptiness of not being accepted by his family weighed heavily on my heart. There were moments when I questioned myself, when I wondered if perhaps I was the problem. Maybe I was not good enough, not smart enough, not skilled in the ways they valued. Maybe my cooking was too different, my manners too unfamiliar, my presence too inconvenient. I searched myself over and over, trying to find the flaw that kept me on the outside of their world. Yet deep down, I knew the truth: it was not about what I did or did not do. It was simply that I was not born one of them. Their circle had been drawn long before I ever arrived, and I was forever standing just beyond its edge. The hardest moments came during celebrations when families are meant to feel closest. Birthdays, anniversaries, holidays, times that should have been filled with joy became reminders of the space between us. I remember one Thanksgiving when I spent hours preparing a dish I thought they would love, something I worked on carefully, pouring every bit of love into it. When we arrived at the farmhouse, my dish was placed at the far end of the table where no one reached for it. Instead, everyone praised the food his mother made, complimenting her on how nothing could ever taste better than the way she did it. My dish went untouched, cold by the time the meal ended. I smiled politely, but inside I felt as though I had been erased. That night, while everyone laughed and shared memories by the fire, I stood at the window looking out into the dark Oregon night, wondering why it was so hard for them to simply let me in. My husband joined me, wrapping his arm around my shoulders, whispering that he loved me, that I was enough for him. And though his love did give me strength, it did not erase the ache of knowing his family saw me as something less. Even the smallest gestures reminded me of that ache. When family photos were taken, I was always placed at the very edge, almost as if I could be cropped out without anyone noticing. When decisions were made about family matters, my voice was never asked for, never valued. When they spoke of us, I knew that word did not include me. And yet, I kept trying. I kept bringing gifts, kept offering help, kept smiling even when my heart felt heavy. I thought if I simply kept showing love, one day it would return. But as the years passed, I began to understand that love does not always find its way back, not when hearts are determined to remain closed. I learned to carry my loneliness quietly, to place my hope in the family my husband and I were building together rather than the one that refused to open their arms. Still, the words lingered, whispered in my mind whenever I felt the sting of being left out. I was not one of them. And perhaps I never would be. But the story of my life did not end there, because even in the shadow of rejection, there were small moments of light, moments that reminded me that belonging does not always come from where you are placed but from the love you choose to give and the life you choose to create. As more years passed, I began to notice how rejection does not always come through harsh words or loud actions, but often through silence, through the quiet ways a person can be made to feel invisible. My husband's family rarely spoke against me directly, but their lack of warmth was like a cold wind that never stopped blowing. I could be standing in the same room with them and still feel as if I were far away. I had entered their lives with open hands, eager to hold them as my own family, but those hands were often left empty. I remember one day when his sister was planning a baby shower. Everyone in the family was invited to help, to share ideas, to bring decorations. I arrived with my own basket of little handmade favors I had worked on for days, ribbons, and small touches I thought might bring beauty to the celebration. When I showed them to the group, his sister smiled faintly and said, "That's sweet, but we already have everything we need." She set my basket aside without another glance. The other women nodded and continued their planning as though I had never spoken. I sat quietly, my cheeks burning, feeling as though I had made some foolish mistake by trying to contribute. Later that night, I cried in the privacy of my own room, wondering why even my small gestures of love seemed to have no place among them. There were also birthdays where I felt the sting of exclusion. When his brothers or cousins celebrated, gifts from every member of the family were opened with laughter and affection, yet mine was often the last gift passed around, unwrapped quickly, followed by an awkward silence. Sometimes I wondered if they even noticed what I had given, or if it mattered at all. I wanted so desperately to hear a word of thanks spoken with sincerity, to see even one smile that showed I was appreciated. But it rarely came. In those moments I began to realize that my heart was quietly breaking, little by little, under the weight of never being truly seen. Still, I tried to remind myself that bitterness would only poison me further. My husband, bless him, always tried to protect me from the worst of it. He would notice when I withdrew into myself at family gatherings, and he would lean closer, squeeze my hand, and whisper words of comfort. "You're my family," he would remind me. "You're the one who matters most." His love was my anchor, the reason I could keep walking into rooms where I knew I would feel like an outsider. Without his steady reassurance, I might have given up long ago. But even with his love, there were times I questioned my place in this world. One memory still lives sharp in my heart. It was during a summer picnic by the river, a tradition his family had kept for decades. They set up long tables covered with food, the children ran laughing through the grass, and the men set up games of horseshoe and baseball. Everyone was assigned tasks, some grilled, some prepared drinks, some organized games. When I asked how I could help, his mother looked at me for a long moment and then said softly, "Why don't you just sit and watch?" Those words pierced me deeply. To her, I was not even capable of contributing, not trusted enough to share in their traditions. I sat quietly on the edge of the gathering, watching laughter and joy swirl around me like a current I could never step into. It was in that moment that the sentence I had feared the most became reality. I was not one of them, and they intended to keep it that way. The years continued, and though there were small acts of politeness, I never felt the warmth of being truly welcomed. When family decisions were made, such as where to celebrate holidays or how to handle matters of inheritance, my husband was included, but my opinion was never asked. Even when I tried to offer a thought, it was quickly brushed aside. I learned to keep quiet, to let them speak, to fade into the background like a shadow that accompanied my husband but was not part of the circle. And yet, I could not stop my heart from longing. I wanted so badly to be part of something bigger than myself, to be held by the embrace of family, to hear the words, "You are one of us." But those words never came. Instead, I learned to carry my ache silently, to let my tears fall in private, to build my strength in quiet ways. I poured my love into my home, into the meals I cooked for my husband, into the small traditions we built together. If his family would not claim me, then I would create a place of belonging in the life we shared. That became my survival, my way of turning sorrow into something bearable. Still, there were moments when my loneliness slipped through the cracks. At church, when other women spoke fondly of their mothers-in-law or shared stories of how their families gathered around them in times of need, I would smile politely while inside I felt a sharp emptiness. I wanted to know that kind of closeness, but it was not mine to have. Instead, I prayed for strength, asking God to help me carry this burden without letting it turn my heart bitter. Slowly, I began to realize something important. Though his family may never see me as one of them, I was still enough. My worth did not come from their acceptance. It came from the love I gave, the life I built, the faith I carried in my heart. This lesson did not come easily, but it began to grow within me, giving me a quiet strength I had not known before. Oregon's long winters taught me this too. When the skies stayed gray for weeks and the rain poured endlessly, I learned that light could still be found in the smallest places, in the warmth of a candle, in the quiet of a book, in the laughter I shared with my husband at our own table, away from all others. Belonging, I began to see, was not always given. Sometimes it had to be created, built slowly like a fire in the hearth, fed by patience and hope. And though I still wished his family would open their arms to me, I stopped holding my breath for it. Instead, I began to breathe in the life I had, imperfect though it was, and find gratitude for the love that was mine. Even now, as I look back, I remember the ache of those years vividly. Yet I also see the strength they gave me, the way rejection shaped me into someone who could endure, someone who could still choose love even when love was not returned. That choice became my quiet victory, though it took many years for me to understand it fully. Time is a strange thing, my dear, because it can wound and it can heal, sometimes both at once. The years I spent in Oregon with my husband's family taught me that even when you feel like an outsider, life still continues to move forward. Babies are born, children grow, elders pass away, and seasons change whether you are included or not. There were moments when I felt so invisible that I wondered if anyone would even notice if I disappeared, but life has a way of reminding you that your existence carries meaning, even if only to a few. My husband was my constant reminder. No matter how cold his family could be, he never wavered in his love for me. He would look at me and say, "You are my home," and those words became the foundation of my strength. Even when I sat quietly at the edge of family gatherings, I reminded myself that the most important person in that room had chosen me. Still, I will not lie to you, the ache of not belonging never truly left. There were years when I dreaded holidays because I knew they would only highlight the distance. One Christmas stands out in my memory like a scar. We had worked hard to save money, and I bought thoughtful gifts for each member of his family. I wrapped them carefully, hoping that perhaps this year they would feel my love in the little things. But when the evening came, my gifts were opened quickly and set aside, while theirs for each other were admired and passed around for everyone to see. I tried to smile, but I felt like a shadow watching from the edge of the room. I wondered if my heart would always be left unopened, just like my gifts. My husband saw the pain in my eyes that night, and when we came home, he pulled me close and whispered, "Don't let their blindness take away your light." His words stayed with me, reminding me that my worth did not depend on their approval. But it was not always easy to hold on to that truth. There were many nights I sat by the window, listening to the Oregon rain, letting my tears fall silently. I longed for my own family, for the warmth of people who had known me since birth, for the comfort of being one of us somewhere. The loneliness of being far from home mixed with the rejection from his family and created a heaviness in my chest that seemed unshakable. I prayed often during those years. I asked God to give me patience, to soften their hearts, to help me endure the silence. And though his answers did not come quickly or in the way I expected, I believe those prayers built something within me: resilience, compassion, and a deeper understanding of love. Love, I learned, is not always about being loved in return. Sometimes it is about giving without expectation, about choosing kindness even when it is not received. Slowly, I began to shift my focus. Instead of waiting for their acceptance, I started pouring my energy into the life my husband and I were building together. I decorated our home with warmth, filled it with laughter, and created traditions that belonged to us alone. I baked cookies not for his family, but for neighbors and friends who appreciated them. I planted flowers in the yard and found joy in watching them bloom, knowing that beauty could grow even in places where hearts felt barren. Oregon itself became both my comfort and my teacher. The tall pine trees reminded me that roots can take time to grow, that even when storms rage, strength can be found in standing tall. The rivers showed me that life keeps flowing forward no matter what stones lie in the way. The mountains whispered patience, reminding me that even the tallest obstacles can be lived with when you choose not to climb them every day. And the rain, oh the rain, it fell endlessly, yet from it came green fields and blooming gardens. That rain taught me that sorrow can also water the soul, producing growth unseen until years later. I began to see that my life did not need their approval to hold meaning. I started seeking joy in small ways, in the smell of bread baking, in the sound of my husband's laughter, in the quiet evenings when the two of us would sit by the fire and share stories of our dreams. Slowly, the ache of rejection became less sharp. It was still there, yes, like a scar that never fully fades, but it no longer controlled me. Instead, it became part of my story, part of what shaped me into the woman I was becoming. There were even times when I felt pity for his family. I realized that their inability to welcome me came not from my lack, but from their own fear of change. They clung so tightly to their traditions, to their sense of us, that they could not see the gift of who I was. And though it hurt me deeply, I began to understand that their rejection said more about them than it ever did about me. One autumn, after many years of feeling like an outsider, I had a moment of clarity. We were at another family gathering, sitting around a long table filled with food. As usual, I sat quietly, listening to their conversations, waiting for someone to include me. But as I looked around the table, I realized something: I no longer needed their approval. Their words, their silences, their glances, they no longer held the same power over me. For years I had measured my worth by their acceptance, but in that moment I knew my worth came from within, from the love I gave, from the life I built, from the faith I carried. I was not one of them, but I was still whole, still valuable, still enough. That night, as we drove home through the Oregon rain, I felt a quiet peace settle over me. My husband reached for my hand and I smiled at him, truly smiled, because I realized that while I may never belong to his family, I belonged to him, and that was enough. More than enough. Life has a way of teaching us lessons through pain, and this was mine. Belonging is not always found in the places we expect. Sometimes it is built in the love we choose, in the home we create, in the strength we discover within ourselves. And though his family never fully embraced me, I learned to embrace myself. As the years went by, my story shifted little by little, for though my husband's family still kept me at a distance, my life began to fill with other kinds of belonging. You see, sometimes when one door remains closed, another opens in a place you least expect. I learned to stop pressing my face against the door of their acceptance and instead look around for the windows of kindness that life still offered me. One of those windows came through neighbors who showed me warmth when I needed it most. In those early days I baked bread and pies as a way to comfort myself, and when I shared them with people living nearby they welcomed me with smiles and gratitude. They did not care where I was born or how I did things differently, they simply enjoyed my company and the gifts I brought. Slowly, I built friendships in the community that gave me the feeling of family I could not find with my in-laws. I began to host small gatherings at my own home, inviting neighbors for tea or supper, filling my kitchen with laughter that had been missing from the larger family table. It was in those moments that I realized family is not only blood, sometimes it is the people who choose to sit beside you and share life's simple joys. My husband encouraged this, always telling me, if they cannot see your worth, others surely will. His faith in me gave me the courage to open myself up to new connections, and in doing so I found belonging in unexpected places. Another turning point came when our children were born. Holding my babies in my arms gave me a new sense of purpose, a reason to stand tall even when others made me feel small. I remember rocking them to sleep, whispering promises that they would always know they belonged, that they would never feel the sting of exclusion in their own home. I poured into them all the love I had longed for, creating a circle of acceptance where no one was left out. In those moments I understood something important. Though I could not change how my husband's family treated me, I could change the story for the next generation. I could raise children who would never doubt they were loved, children who would learn that kindness matters more than tradition, that hearts are more important than bloodlines. My children became my anchor in those years. Their laughter filled the spaces that rejection had carved out of my heart. Every milestone they reached, first steps, first words, first days of school, reminded me that I was building something lasting, something beautiful, something no one could take away from me. Even when his family showed little interest in celebrating these milestones with us, I refused to let that dull the joy. I told myself that my children did not need the approval of people who could not even open their arms to their mother. What they needed was the steady love I could give them every single day, and that was exactly what I offered. Still, there were moments when the ache returned. I would watch his mother cradle the children with affection, and though I was glad for my babies to be loved, I could not ignore the thought that she had never cradled me with the same warmth. I remained the outsider, tolerated but never embraced. Yet instead of letting that wound fester, I chose to turn it into fuel. Each time I felt excluded, I doubled my efforts to make my home a place of unconditional welcome. I told myself again and again, my children will never question their worth the way I have. They will never sit at the edge of the table feeling invisible. They will know, from the depths of their souls, that they are one of us. My faith also carried me through those years. I turned often to prayer, not only for strength but also for forgiveness. I asked God to help me release the bitterness that threatened to grow in my heart, because I knew that carrying anger would only harm me further. Slowly, I found peace in letting go of expectations. I stopped waiting for his family to change, stopped hoping for words of acceptance that would never come. Instead, I chose to focus on what I could control: the love within my own home, the friendships I nurtured in my community, the faith that reminded me I was never truly alone. I learned to see God's hand even in the rejection. Perhaps He had allowed me to feel like an outsider so that I could better understand the importance of inclusion. Perhaps He wanted me to learn that true family is not always the one you marry into, but the one you create through love and faith. This realization did not erase the sorrow, but it transformed it into something I could carry without breaking. Oregon itself seemed to mirror this transformation. The rain that once felt heavy on my shoulders began to feel cleansing, as though it were washing away the bitterness each time it fell. The forests that once seemed lonely now felt protective, offering me a quiet refuge where I could breathe and pray. Even the gray skies began to remind me that light still exists above the clouds, even if unseen. And as my children grew older, I began to see myself through their eyes. To them I was not an outsider, not someone who failed to belong. To them I was the center of their world, the safe place they always returned to, the mother who cheered for them louder than anyone else. Their love was proof that I was enough, and it filled the cracks that rejection had left in me. Over time, I came to see that my story was not only about being left out, but also about choosing to love anyway. His family may never have called me one of them, but I discovered something greater. I could still live with an open heart, still give love without measure, still create a legacy of belonging in my own home. That, in the end, was more powerful than any rejection. And though the ache of being excluded never vanished completely, it no longer defined me. Instead, it became part of my strength, a reminder that even in the shadow of rejection, love can still grow, families can still be built, and lives can still hold meaning. As the years rolled into decades, I found myself growing older, and with age came a kind of perspective I had not known in my younger days. When I was first married, I thought acceptance from my husband's family was something I could earn if I tried hard enough, if I baked enough pies, if I spoke with enough kindness, if I offered enough help. But with time I realized that belonging is not something that can be forced. It is either given freely or it is withheld, and no amount of effort on my part could make them open a door they had chosen to keep closed. That truth used to bring me deep sorrow, but as I aged it began to bring me a quiet peace. I stopped asking why they had never embraced me, because I understood at last that the answer did not lie in who I was but in who they were. Their vision of family was narrow, bound tightly by roots and bloodlines and history that left no room for someone like me. I was not born into their story, so they never allowed me a place in its pages. For a long time I thought this made me less. I thought it meant I was unworthy or unlovable. But the older I grew, the clearer it became: my worth was never tied to their recognition. It was tied to the life I had built, the love I had given, and the faith I had carried even in the hardest of times. Looking back, I see that rejection shaped me, yes, but it did not destroy me. In fact, it gave me strength I might never have discovered otherwise. It taught me resilience, compassion, and the ability to love even when love was not returned. Those are lessons that have carried me far in life, and for that I cannot call my pain meaningless. Still, I will not pretend the ache ever disappeared completely. Even as I grew older, even as I raised children who loved me dearly, there were moments when I still felt the sting of being not one of them. At family gatherings I was still placed at the edge of photographs, still left out of conversations, still treated with polite distance rather than true warmth. By then I no longer cried over it, but I would feel a heaviness in my chest as I watched them embrace one another while I stood slightly apart. Age gives you wisdom, but it does not erase the longing to belong. I think all of us, no matter how old we get, carry that deep need to be seen, to be included, to hear the words, "You are one of us." I never heard those words from his family, but I began to realize that I had heard them in other ways throughout my life. I heard them in the laughter of my children when they ran to me with open arms. I heard them in the voices of neighbors who called me friend and invited me into their homes. I heard them in the quiet prayers I whispered at night when I felt God reminding me that I was His child, and therefore I belonged to Him. Those voices became louder to me than the silence of my husband's family. And yet, there were times when bitterness tried to creep in. I would see how other daughters-in-law were embraced, how other women were celebrated at the center of family circles, and I would feel envy tug at me. But each time bitterness rose, I fought to let it go, because I knew that holding on to it would only poison the joy I had. My life was too precious, too short, to waste on resentment. So I practiced forgiveness, not because they ever asked for it, but because I needed it for myself. Forgiving them did not mean forgetting what they had done or pretending it had not hurt me. It simply meant choosing to release the weight of their rejection so that I could walk lighter through the years ahead. Forgiveness became my gift to myself, a way of saying that I would not let their blindness rob me of the light I still carried inside. As I grew older, I also began to see the contrast between the family I was born into and the family I had married into. My own parents had passed on by then, but I often thought of their kindness, of the way they welcomed others with open hearts, of the way they believed love was more important than bloodlines. I carried their example with me, letting it guide the way I treated others. I wanted my home to reflect the openness they had given me. I wanted anyone who entered my door to feel they belonged, no matter who they were or where they came from. And in doing so, I found healing. Each time I welcomed someone else, I healed a small piece of the rejection I had endured. Each time I made someone feel like they were one of us, I soothed the wound of being told I was not one of them. Slowly, my pain became purpose. By the time my children were grown, I could look back on my life and see that while I may not have been embraced by my husband's family, I had created a legacy of belonging in my own way. My children grew into adults who valued kindness, who built friendships beyond blood, who never let anyone sit alone at the edge of a gathering. Watching them live out those values gave me a satisfaction that no acceptance from his family could have matched. It showed me that my struggles had not been wasted. They had shaped me into someone who could pass down a better way of loving, a better vision of family. Even as I aged and my hair turned silver, the words of not one of them sometimes echoed in my mind, but they no longer carried the same sting. Instead, they became a reminder of how far I had come. I was not one of them, no, but I had become fully myself. I had found belonging in other places, in other people, in the faith that never left me. I had discovered that being excluded from one circle does not mean you are excluded from life itself. There are always other circles, other homes, other hearts that will welcome you if you are willing to see them. Now, when I sit and reflect on those years, I see not only the sorrow but also the triumph. I see a woman who endured coldness and still chose warmth, who faced rejection and still chose love, who was told she did not belong and still built a life filled with belonging. That, my dear, is the quiet victory of my story. As I sit here now in the twilight of my years, I can look back on my life with clearer eyes than I ever had when I was living through it. The sting of being told in words and actions that I was not one of them no longer pierces me the way it once did. Instead, it rests inside me like an old scar, a reminder of a pain that shaped me but no longer defines me. My husband's family never truly welcomed me, that much I cannot change, but life has shown me that rejection is not the end of the story. For many years I believed that belonging came only from being accepted by others, from being invited into their circles and told I was one of them. But age has taught me something different. Belonging, I have learned, can also come from within, from creating your own circle of love, from embracing yourself, and from recognizing that God's arms have always been wide enough to hold those the world has pushed aside. His family said I was not one of them, and perhaps by their standards that was true. But I have come to see that it was never my loss, it was theirs. They missed the chance to truly know me, to see the love I carried, to share in the joys I had to give. They built their walls so high that they shut out a heart that wanted nothing more than to join them. And though I grieved that rejection for many years, I now pity them more than I resent them. For what is a family if not a place to welcome those who love you? What is tradition if it cannot grow to make room for others? What is blood if it runs cold instead of warm? I see now that their smallness of heart kept them from something beautiful, and that realization has set me free. Instead of dwelling on the love I never received, I dwell on the love I gave. I gave it to my husband, who stood by me through every storm. I gave it to my children, who grew up knowing without a doubt that they were cherished. I gave it to friends and neighbors, to strangers who became like kin, to anyone who crossed my threshold. And most importantly, I gave it to myself. I learned to love the woman who endured, the woman who did not let rejection turn her bitter, the woman who chose kindness even when it was not returned. That, to me, is victory. Oregon has been my home for most of my life now, and though my roots may not run as deep as my husband's family claimed theirs did, they are here nonetheless. My hands have planted gardens in this soil, my footsteps have worn paths through its forests, my laughter has echoed inside its walls. My life is here, my memories are here, my children grew here, and that makes this place mine every bit as much as it was theirs. I used to feel like an intruder in this land, but now I see that the land itself never rejected me. It was only people. The rain still fell on me as it did on them, the sun still rose for me as it did for them, the earth still accepted the seeds I planted and gave me flowers in return. Nature does not ask where you came from, it only asks that you tend to it with care. In that way, the land of Oregon became my silent companion, reminding me that I belonged to creation itself, even if I did not belong to that family. As I grew older and watched my children build families of their own, I saw the fruits of my struggle. They became people who welcomed others with open arms, who never drew lines between who was in and who was out, who understood that family is made of love rather than blood alone. In them I saw my legacy, proof that my pain had not been in vain. Every time they invite someone to their table, every time they make another feel like one of us, I know they are carrying forward the lesson I learned the hard way. That knowledge gives me peace. And now, as I share this story with you, I want you to understand something. If you have ever felt like an outsider, if you have ever been told you do not belong, if you have ever been pushed to the edge of the circle and made to feel invisible, you are not alone. I know that pain. I carried it for years. But I also know this: rejection does not define you. You can still build a life full of love. You can still create belonging in your own home, in your friendships, in your faith, in your heart. You may not be one of them, but you are still one of us, one of the many souls in this world who have chosen love over bitterness, kindness over resentment, strength over despair. That, my dear, is the truest belonging of all. When I leave this world, I will not be remembered by his family as one of them, but I do not need to be. I will be remembered by my children and grandchildren, by neighbors and friends, by those whose lives I touched with kindness. They will say that I loved well, that I created a home where no one felt left out, that I carried light even in the shadow of rejection. And to me, that is enough. More than enough. So yes, their words were true in a sense, I was not one of them. But in another, deeper truth, I was always one of something greater, one of the women who endure, one of the mothers who love fiercely, one of the souls who find strength in sorrow, one of the people who choose to keep their hearts open no matter how many doors are closed. And that, my dear, is the story I leave with you.